Millie is also a Blumenfeld Junior Fellow, I'd like to say.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah.
An excellent article
Thank
from
you.
which this talk derives.
Yeah, and that's what I'm going to be discussing tonight, is about my article that I wrote recently, which is called Finding Glimmers of Climate Hope in the Age of Trump. You can find that on the website. I don't know if you haven't read it, I'm going to go through parts of it anyway, so that's okay.
The Science for Peace website.
Yes, yeah. And I importantly didn't know this event was going to be happening when I wrote this piece, so it kind of worked out really perfectly. But I started writing this piece in November, when I was grappling with a lot of fear and uncertainty, as I'm sure many of us in the room were experiencing. And to be fair, I find myself I think I was quite ill prepared for what the reality would actually be, in considering the first month that we've experienced with the new administration. However, nonetheless, the fear still loomed, and I picked up a book that I genuinely intended to bring with me, but do not have on hand, but it's called What If We Get It Right? And it's by a marine biologist, climate activist, and policy expert named Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson. And she is based in Brooklyn and runs the Ocean Science Labs, which is a think tank based out of there as well. And she's written other books, but this book specifically is very focused on holding space for reframing how we think about the climate crisis and social injustice. And for me personally, it was a really important message, because it came out in November 2024, but I don't think that the author necessarily knew what was going to be happening. And it really kind of enabled me to reshape my perspective in terms of praxis and thinking under this sort of 4-year scope of uncertainty that we have. And yeah, so I think that so much of what we're shown and kind of given to consume right now is really grounded in uncertainty and in fear and about these big scary changes, and it's incredibly valid and necessary that we're talking about those things. But at the same time, these sorts of dialogues, especially happening in mainstream media, are really overtaking leadership and decision making and the narratives that we're able to converse about, and even in this room what we're able to discuss in many ways. And we're often kind of forced to ask, I think, what can go wrong or what is going wrong, and how can we prepare and mitigate for those sorts of realities, rather than, I think, typically trying to imagine what if we get it right, or how can we have hope and find community and collectivism in these sorts of times. So each chapter of the book, pretend it's here, it's a beautiful cover, presents 10 pressing problems that we're kind of facing in terms of the climate crisis, but then also about social inequity. There's a lot of intersectionality that's strewn throughout the book. And it's structured as a series of interviews, which I think is really cool, because the author has a really unique way of writing, but also with poetry and other research articles, all aimed at kind of expanding this scope of possibility that we can imagine. So the question of what if we get it right is posed to experts from various fields, and it sort of feels radical in its optimism at first, because it doesn't really, it kind of almost kind of just breezes past the fact that there's these other questions of what might be happening, and focuses on the positivity and the light that can come out of it. And it really, it invited me personally to imagine differently, to think a little bit more creatively, and then also to reach out to different communities, because I have some friends as well that have read the book and that share those ideas as well. And we've had meetings about that and stuff too, which has been cool. And importantly, it's very difficult to maintain this sort of optimistic and fervent energy in times like this, especially with this current political climate, when many of us can see what it is that's going to potentially be happening and what the realities of that are. However, as I explore my research, there are vast challenges that we face with the Trump administration, and those kind of span from, obviously the erosion of democracy and threats to international law, to sovereignty, and these concerns obviously demand our attention. But this is especially true, I think, when we consider climate and social justice and progress towards things like the Sustainable Development Goals and, just generally a more peaceful and sustainable world. And these critical areas are very much under attack. Restrictions on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, not only at the governmental levels, but these also are having major trickle-down effects to large corporations and many forms of higher education and things as well. Furthermore, there's of course rollbacks to important legislation like the Green New Deal and the Inflation Reduction Act, and a lot of divestment and disengagement from green tech developments and climate-oriented research. And this signals very, very concerning trends, especially considering the fact that the USA has withdrawn from institutions like the World Health Organization and from international commitments and agreements like the Paris Accords. And this really isolates not only the nation, but maybe more importantly, the funding that it can provide to the world. However, at the crux of my research and of course the discussion that we're having here is that these political regressions, I might call them, are kind of only one part of the story. They don't necessitate us focusing only on the fear, because I think that tends to put us in a very passive and almost sort of kind of stagnant position. Rather, I think that we should be focusing on the movements, initiatives, and organizations that come up in response, that provide hope, that can breed resilience, and that are often looking for innovation in really cool ways. And this is all rooted in the fact that the way that we think about the challenges that we confront really shapes the actions that we can take around it and the futures that we can therefore imagine. And if we consume only narratives of despair, powerless, that's the word I was looking for earlier, is how we might feel. But if we recognize the potential for change and community building in those spaces, we might be able to move towards more collectivism and more sustainable action as well. So this is why we are here today, to discuss the bases for hope, to look beyond, in many ways, the next 4 years, and to try to recognize the larger trends at play to foster a sense of collective responsibility that is hopeful. One of the most promising indicators from my research is the progress in exponential and exponential growth in investments in renewable energy and green technologies. In 2024 alone, $2 billion were funneled into green technologies, far outpacing fossil fuel investments. And according to many different trends, those trends are expected to continue. And this shift is happening globally and in many ways also impacting norms around the world. And to be fair, I like to think that an administration that's hostile to climate action will have to contend with the economic realities of a world that is moving, albeit very slowly, toward more sustainable and renewable sorts of energies and ways of being. And I also think it will be crucial, inevitably, for Trump to attend to the developments that are happening, especially in countries that he feels in competition with, and especially if he wants to remain a global power in that way as well. That's I guess just my opinion, but and in my research, I kind of wanted to highlight this message of hope. That's why it's finding glimmers of climate hope where we can. And the book that I mentioned, What If We Get It Right, really sort of puts forth this aspect of hope and the ability to see it happening in so many different and varied areas as well, which is really exciting. So one of the examples, I'll just name a couple of them. Outside of the United States is a group called Climate Trace, which is an organization that uses very, very obviously new technology, but to track emissions from around the world, to then hold corporations and governments accountable to their commitments to international agreements and things like that. And then another thing that really, when I found this, I got really excited, but I just hadn't thought about it before, I guess. Just thinking about the American context specifically, is that there are many subnational movements that are happening in municipalities and in different states that are really kind of almost, rejecting, I guess, the regressions that we're seeing. So 2 examples are America All In, which is committed to the goals of the Paris Accord and to furthering the message of the World Health Organization, despite who it is that's in power or what party it is that's been elected. And another one is Climate Mayors, and that's a coalition of, I think it was 350 mayors from around the United States who are committed to, in their localities, really supporting and pushing forward on how we can change and continue to promote sustainability. And I think these initiatives, and countless others, to be fair, offer tangible reasons to hope. And they remind us that although federal leadership is really important, it is not at all really the sole driver of change. Cities, states, grassroots movements, and international collaborations continue to push forward, regardless of who holds office. And it's for this reason I think that like hope cannot and is not often passive. It's not about ignoring the very real threats that we face, but rather about recognizing that our choices, our voices, and our collective actions shape the world that we live in. Each of us here today likely has an initiative or an organization or even just an idea that inspires hope in our specific like situated circumstances. And what we do with that hope and what you do with that hope really matters. So we have to remain vigilant and organize in spaces such as this and continue to imagine a world that prioritizes justice, sustainability, and equity. And this is all also while remaining attentive to the real challenges of the next 4 years and investing in the future that we want to build. So the work of justice and sustainability does not end with an election cycle. It is an ongoing effort, one that requires us to think beyond the immediate political landscape, even while we're living in it. And so I have kind of, I guess, a question that I hope is a takeaway, I suppose, is what if we do get it right? And what if, in your specific context, what does that look like for you and for the people around you in your communities? So yeah, thank you. That's my